Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/malicious compliance. In today's episode, if you don't have a good review, don't say anything at all. Say no more. Don't call me mommy? Okay. New travel policy to save money ends up costing so much more. Long. Compliance with company timesheet requirements resulted in 40% pay increase. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. If you don't have a good review, don't say anything at all. Say no more. This happened years and years ago when my school had taken us on a 2-day field trip to a hill station close to the city. All of us on the trip were kids who were in the 6th to 8th grade. The trip was a blast, and everyone had fun. The event happened just before we were supposed to leave. So, our school had a weird policy where after every field trip, they would gather all the students in one room and pick out a random group of students and ask them to say a couple sentences about the venue and experience, whatever. 5 of us were chosen for it this time, and were asked to wait in an adjacent room and come out one by one. It was all cool till the first girl went up to the mic and said the experience was nice, but I felt that the food that was served was stale. I think a few people got sick. As soon as she finished speaking, the vice principal flew into a rage as she descended on this poor girl and started screaming. "Who do you think you are? These guys have been working super hard for us all weekend. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all." Now her reaction might not make sense, but the hotel where we were staying at belonged to some relative of hers, which is probably why we were there in the first place, and she felt some type of way about it. That girl almost started crying as she came back to us. I was next up, so I was standing and waiting, but the VP went on a long rant about being well behaved and setting a good example. I think at this point it's worth talking about one of the other kids chosen to do this pointless exercise. He was an older kid in the 8th grade, and he had an accident on the trip, so his arm was slinged up. The accident was, I think, caused partly by negligence from the hotel staff. I'm blanking on the details right now, and he was fully prepared to talk about it. So this tantrum made him especially pissed, especially because the same VP had refused to send him home early from the trip because it would cost too much. He told us this later. This guy holds my arm and tells me, "Hey," she said, "don't say anything if it's not good, so don't say anything." So I went out, stood there for a few seconds, said I don't have anything to say, and came back. The kids who went after me did the same. This guy went last. He goes up to the mic, and at this point the VP is shouting again, "Did you do this? Don't you dare say nothing," or something of this sort. He says, "I loved being here, glad that I was able to be here even after I hurt my arm. I will be really sad now that I have to go back to my parents and an actual doctor." The vice principal lost her shit at that. Most of the kids were too young to understand sarcasm, but they definitely did start laughing at her. She threatened to suspend/fine everyone there, and she delayed the buses back to our town by 2 hours as punishment. A few days later, they called my parents in for a disciplinary hearing, and the VP started narrating the story to them. When she got to the point about the complaint from that first girl, my dad said, "Wait, so the hotel was serving stale food?" I think the VP kinda got shook by that a bit because I was asked to go back to class shortly after, and nothing else came of it. Don't call me mommy? Okay. Apparently this happened when I was about 3 years old, but my mother has held it over my head for the last 20 years. My mom was on the phone with my grandmother, and I wanted to get her attention for something. I did what any 3-year-old would do and tugged on her leg and called mommy out to her. She gave me an annoyed look and kept on with her conversation. Whatever it was I needed, it must have been really important, and I kept at it. After a few more tries, she eventually shouted at me, "Stop calling me mommy." From that moment on, my first little malicious compliance switch went off in my head, and I only called her mom or mother from then on. She was always heartbroken for years after this and often brought it up. I was her only kid, and it embarrassed her to no end being called mother in front of other people when I was so young. And to rub salt into the wound, I still call my father daddy to this day. New travel policy to save money ends up costing so much more. Long. My company was on a cost-saving kick and decided to look for a way to shave pennies. Now they could have looked at the amount of money that was squandered by people jetting all over the country on company time at a huge hourly rate. Basically, the labor spend is always much higher than the cost of the flight, car hire, hotel and food combined, or the number of strategizing away days that HR etc. went on, but no, they came for the lowly engineers. When the company starts counting paperclips, you know that you are about to have some fun. We were called to a consultation session. Read. We are telling you what we decided based on what we think goes on and not what actually goes on. The session was about saving money on hire cars. In our company, if you have to go away from your home site, you can use your own car and choose a mileage rate up to about a 40-mile journey. If it is longer, then you should have a hire car. Hire cars are usually dropped off at the office by transporter, or you can pick one up at a hire office, or you can get a car dropped off at home for a small fee, £14 plus fuel. Travel department announced that there were to be no more home drop-offs to save money. The engineers knew how this was going to pan out and said nothing. The thing to know here about the travel department is that they do not travel. None of the knowledge is from the real world. Travel announced that the new policy was that home drop-offs were to cease. We had to pick up the hire car at the office or at the nearest Hertz rental location. Sounds simple. All the engineers who travel a lot could instantly see the issues, but as we were told that this is the new policy, we had to comply. So we did. Maliciously. I was on a job 300 miles away at the customer site. I traveled down on the Monday morning, starting at 6 a.m., and back up Thursday, home about 6 p.m. Because of the travel time, I got the Friday off. I also lived a 100-mile round trip from the office, and my nearest Hertz office was at the airport. This was not an unusual situation. A lot of people I worked with traveled to client locations. The weekend arrived. Usually at some point over the weekend a car is dropped off and the key and paperwork is popped through my letterbox for the princely sum of £14 and no time from me. Instead, because the Hertz office was closed at 6 a.m. on the Monday morning, I picked up the car the day before. Because my wife needed my car while I was away, and therefore could not leave my car parked at the airport, I took a taxi as per company travel policy, £35 and 40 minutes, I picked up the car, about 30 minutes, and drove home, about 30 minutes. On the Thursday evening, instead of heading home and getting the car picked up on the Friday, I headed straight to the airport, dropped off the car, and took a taxi back, £40 and about 40 minutes due to busy traffic. Our expenses are done monthly, so by the end of the month I have 3 weeks travel to account for, which would have been 3x £14 plus a small refueling charge for the trip back to the Hertz office. Instead they got about £200 for taxi fares, and an overtime bill of about 4.5 hours at about £80 per hour. I was not the only one. Some engineers took a taxi into the office to pick up the car, as their spouse needed the car while they were away. Some took a taxi to the nearest Hertz office. All of us put in our overtime at the end of the month. Travel has no overtime budget, and so it all got claimed from the project. The project labor budget teams went ballistic, and went all flaming torches and pitchforks on the travel department. The policy didn't last the day. Compliance with company timesheet requirements resulted in 40% pay increase. Reposted with my correct account. The background. I have been a freelance contractor for over 30 years, UK, and worked for many companies, usually on an hourly or daily rate. About 10 years ago I had the opportunity to work for a client on a 6-month contract on a daily rate, and also to work from home except for some site visits for meetings. Since I was working from home, I was able to work my own hours. I was judged basically on my output, not the bum hours on seat. I would work whenever I wanted, an hour here or there, multiple breaks during the work day, and also sometimes at weekends whenever I felt like it. However, I ensured that I at least complied with the 40 hours a week minimum even though I was on a daily rate. The way that it worked on this contract was that I would submit my timesheet for my boss to sign, that would be sent to my agency, and they would do all the work to create invoices to the end client and pay me based on how long I worked that week. I did not have to submit invoices to the agency, they used something called self-invoicing. Now, because of the hassle of trying to record all the start times, times for breaks etc., it was a pain to fill in the client's timesheet, which only allowed for one start time, one lunch break, one end time, so, because I was on a daily rate, I would just record a standard 9 to 17:30 start/stop and 30-minute lunch for every weekday, knowing I was putting in the hours and not cheating the client. This was all well for a couple of months. My boss would sign the timesheet, the agency would invoice the client and just send me the money each month. At some point I would reconcile my books noting the payments against my days worked. The compliance. At some point my boss balked at how I was filling in my timesheet and asked for it to be more detailed. This was where the malicious compliance took over. I would carefully record all the periods I was working, which I did anyway, and then create a timesheet for the week. This resulted in several pages of timesheets rather than the previous 5 lines, now showing all periods I worked, all breaks I took, total hours for each day, total hours for the week. My boss would need to check all of this and sign it, and we continued that way for a while. The fallout. Now you may think this was only a small malicious compliance. It took me extra effort to comply. My boss got the detailed timesheet he required and nothing changed. However, there was an unexpected consequence of this compliance, which was rooted in the contract I had signed, and the contract that the client had signed with the intermediate agency. It came down to the definition of a working day. Remember, I was on a daily rate, not an hourly rate, even though the client insisted on a breakdown of all my hours. After a few months, when I tried to reconcile my own company's books, it seemed that I was getting paid more than I expected, 40% more to be precise. When I investigated, it turned out that I had overlooked my contract that stated that I was paid a full day's contract rate irrespective of how many hours I worked on that day. So if I happened to work 10 hours, say, I would just get the day rate, but if I worked for only an hour, I would still get the full day rate. Since I was now giving a timesheet that also detailed the few hours I might work on Saturday and Sunday, as well as the 5 work weeks, even though I was still only working a total of 40 hours, I was getting paid for 7 days rather than 5 days. I decided not to bring it to the notice of my boss, since I doubt he had visibility of the invoices. He was just signing off my timesheet every week. This resulted in an unexpected pay rise for the final couple of months of my contract. I just wish I had complied earlier in my contract. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.